Hi, my name is Tyler Mowry, and welcome to the Writer's Mind Podcast, episode 26. Okay, welcome to another episode of the podcast, Patreon members. Today, what I want to talk about is what I'm calling the learning problem. And this has been something that I've been thinking about this idea kind of without knowing that I was thinking about it. And then recently I was listening to somebody speak on this idea and I was like, oh man, that's exactly what it is. And it really kind of integrated, and that's kind of what I'm talking about today. So first off, I have really felt that important lessons, whether they are sort of life lessons or whether they are storytelling and screenwriting lessons, are very rarely complex. And so usually the most important things are lessons that you have heard a million times. So if you're relating this to writing, for example, you've heard a million times about characters and structure and some of these things. And then as you are writing and working and ideally consistently writing, at some point these ideas or a particular idea clicks and you really have this moment of clarity. And you're like, oh yeah, I've always been told structure works this way, and suddenly I can see it. And then you realize that the solution to your problem has been in front of your face for so long, and then suddenly right now is the first moment that you realized, oh, this is actually the solution to my problem and I should start implementing this. And I was listening to this idea from a entrepreneur named Alex Hormozi, who has a YouTube channel. And Alex said a quote that I really liked, and he said, "At what point does something you've heard your whole life become real for you?" And essentially relating that idea to the fact that what we need to know, the lesson that we need to learn, is not really the new tactic or the new, way of looking at it. It's very likely just the simple idea that you have been avoiding that is your way forward. And I really feel like I have felt this again and again and again as I have learned, specifically writing and then other areas of my life, that a lot of these lessons are really, really simple. It's just about integrating that simple idea into my belief system and into my daily actions. And so it's like I already knew what I needed to do in a knowledge sense, but I hadn't actually integrated that piece of advice or that piece of information into my belief system and into my actions, and that's where the disconnect is. That's where it gets messed up, right? So really it's not just about learning a piece of information in the sense of becoming aware or becoming knowledgeable of a given piece of information or of a given method. The big thing is it comes back to beliefs, right? So when you're learning information, you're not really trying to just learn information. What you're really trying to do is find new belief systems. Because when you actually believe a piece of information, that is when it actually changes what you do and it changes your actions. And so my head is filled up with all sorts of knowledge from all sorts of different things that I have been told, right? But only a small select few of that, massive, different just pieces of information flying around in my head. Only a very small subset of that is actually things that I have integrated into my belief system. And then, we take action based upon our belief system. And so then my life only changes when I have integrated that piece of information into that belief system, which then translates into my day-to-day actions. And so I think this comes back down to the idea that what I talked about on this podcast previously, which was this idea of, genius and complexity and simplicity, where, genius is just a consistent return to what is simple and what works, and complexity is just all of the mess that gets in the way of that. So most of the time, it seems like we really have these cycles of, we start with an idea and then boom, it just balloons out into complexity until we realize what actually works, what doesn't, and then we all pull it back down to those simple elements. And then once you do that pull back down, that's really where learning takes place, right? That's really where I feel like beliefs change, your point of view changes. Your point of view doesn't actually change at the beginning of that cycle where you first learn information, right? Because you learn information, step one, you explode into complexity and chaos, and then you take all of that chaos and then realize, oh, actually, it was this piece of information the whole time. It was this simple idea. And you bring it back down to those core ideas or core idea, and that's where growth comes. And so then getting that simple thing down allows you to enter into the next cycle of growth, which is, okay, now I have actually integrated this particular idea into my belief system. So now I'm going to open up into the next stage of growth and take on new information, and then go through the process of being confused again and having all this complexity, and then focus on what's simple and do it again. Now, I think one thing that can be good, that if you're actually somebody who's aware of not only what they are learning, but the process of learning, is that once you get that idea, the idea of each stage of growth is you getting information, realizing what the simple actionable belief system or the belief set you need, and then going into the next cycle, you can actually move through those cycles a bit faster, because rather than having to be confused for a super long time, you begin every new section of growth thinking, okay, what are the simple core things I need? Rather than just exploding out every single time into chaos. And so this is why I actually think if you're somebody who understands not only what they're learning, but how they're learning, you're able to actually jump fields of study a lot easier, because you understand that the core principles of learning transcend whatever category of learning that you're in, right? So let's say you're trying to grow a social media audience, right? Something that I have done. And let's say that you are a screenwriter or whatever. Let's say that you realize that, okay, well, in screenwriting, the way that I improve is by sticking to a few fundamental core concepts of how a story works, and then doing a lot of writing. And that's pretty much how you improve. That's it. That's all. Boom, there's my whole channel right there. You figure out the core reasons why a story works, and then you just write a lot, and then you just always bring your new stories back to these concepts again and again and again and again. And ideally, you're doing that with more and more and more and more speed, and that is what growing in the skill of a screenwriter ends up actually looking like. And then let's say you go and you're like, okay, well, I'm going to create a YouTube channel, or I'm going to grow some sort of social media following. Well, then you realize, okay, what are the core pieces that I need to grow a social media following? Let's say you're on YouTube. Okay, well, I need to make videos consistently and, figure out what quality videos are and what my audience would like to watch, depending on what kind of YouTube videos I'm making, entertainment, education, etc., and then do that consistently, and then over time, focus that down and improve. And then you realize that, oh, okay, so both of these things really come down to a couple of very simple ideas. Do a lot of the work consistently, and keep what works the focus, right? So with a screenplay, keep philosophical conflict, characters, structure, keep these things as the absolute focus of your story always, and then you'll be improving. With the YouTube channel, you're like, okay, consistently make videos, and then I'm constantly keeping at, videos and types of content that keeps my audience engaged, helps them, educates them or solves their problem or entertains them, depending on the type of YouTube channel you're making. And then you just do that again and again. And then, you do that on a long enough time frame and you begin to see results. And so then let's say you're going into a new stage of life and you can realize that, okay, well, it really comes down to a couple key things again. So if I want to get good at another thing, if I want to learn a new skill, then it just requires me coming back to the idea of how learning works and then applying that to whatever the specifics are in a given field. And again, the system of learning, the system of consistent learning is simple. And then within that, in different categories of learning, it usually comes down to consistent work and a few key rules that you must bring your work back to again and again and again, and then you see progress. And so once you start to realize that, everything opens up. So one of the things I've learned as I have been somebody who has taught the practical screenwriting course is that, in that, essentially, if you're not familiar, the reason for the course is to take writers who are struggling to finish their screenplays to help them finish, and then also give them a system of rewriting so they can take that first draft that they have and then actually rewrite it in a way that actually makes their story better, rather than them trying to change some grammar around and flip some dialogue around, but actually gives them a real clear way to rewrite. So what I've noticed is a lot of the time I'm coming back to some key ideas, and I'll see people, they hear me, but they're not integrating what I'm telling them into their own system of belief on how writing works, right? So as long as they don't do that, then they're not actually really learning what I'm saying. They're only hearing what I'm saying, and those really aren't the same thing. And this is why you will hear teachers, people who teach anything, they will repeat themselves constantly. Repeat. Why? It's not because they think that the people who they're teaching are dumb. It's because at some point in this repetition, it clicks and becomes synthesized into that person's belief system. And so until that moment that they have that piece of synthesis, they're not really learning. They're just hearing information. And so that is why you will hear teachers do that. And it is valuable because, if we could figure this out, I think it would just change humanity. But for some reason, you really have to arrive at that new belief on your own. You really, truly cannot give somebody else a belief. You can give other people information. You can try to reframe things and give them info and try to flip their perception on things, but you cannot take that final step for someone else. For someone else to actually believe a concept that you're teaching them, they must take that step and say, oh, wow, that is the way to think. And there's all sorts of different ways to try and shake them out and get them to that point. But what I've found is the best way usually to do that, especially that I found for myself, is that you learn the best and you integrate new beliefs the fastest when something is on the line, right? When you have to sacrifice something to continue moving, it actually helps you integrate beliefs faster, because if you don't integrate new beliefs, then you're going to lose something tangible. And that could be money, that could be a career opportunity, that could be time, that could be whatever that you find valuable in that moment. But what I have found for me is I have really, at times, tried to avoid doing that. I've tried to avoid putting something on the line and then still move forward and learn. And you can do that. I'm not saying it's impossible to learn without having something on the line, but excuse me, what I found is that you can learn at such a faster pace, putting things on the line and having your information or new belief system coming at some sort of cost, which is fascinating because it relates right back to story, right? When you're looking at Harmon's story circle, one of the things that I say is huge is the idea of, your character, 1, 2, wants something, and then at 5, they are supposed to get that thing, and at point 6, it comes at a cost, right? This is how a story operates, the momentum of the story. Your character wants something, they enter into an unfamiliar situation, they have to adapt to it, they get what they want, but it costs them something, and then they return having changed, right? So you, as a person who would be learning new information, or me, I'll use myself as an example. It's like Tyler wants to learn new information. He enters an unfamiliar situation by, whatever, seeking information, speaking to a person, whatever. He adapts to it, and then 5 and 6 can either be together or they can be flipped, where you can have the cost first and then you get what you want. It doesn't really matter, but the point is you have both. You have getting what you want and having a cost. So, it comes at some sort of cost to me. Let's say it is a time cost, it's a financial cost, it's a whatever that cost might be. And then boom, I can return to, outside of this cycle, having changed, having gained the information and the new belief set that I was looking for, right? And so this is how it's so interesting that you can relate these kinds of things to different areas of life. And that's why I also think that when you can actually see that, when you can see patterns in that way, and that ideas that you learn in story transcend into like the whole concept of learning itself and in other areas of life, then you start to realize that, okay, there really is like a rhythm to life. And the reason that there's a rhythm to stories is because there's a rhythm to life, and there's a rhythm to going after things. I was thinking about this as well. You hear a lot of people talk about how stories don't need structure, and you can just kind of do whatever, and every structural format is restrictive. But what I've found is that the reason that those people think that way is because they're not actually doing any learning, and they're not actually putting anything out on the line. They're just sort of sitting, doing nothing, and then assigning that to story. And so I really think that your personal life experience rolls into your view of story. So if you are somebody who's putting things out on the line, making moves, you have wants, you're entering into unfamiliar situations, you're taking what you want, you're handling risk, you're handling sacrifice, then suddenly when I talk to you about an idea like the story circle, it makes sense to you. But if you're somebody who has never taken any risk, you've always done the safe thing, or you've always looked down upon people that are out there, failing and trying to do something, then suddenly you hear me or someone else talk about structure to narrative, and you say, oh, there's no credibility to that because you don't have any, structure to the rhythm of your own life, right? You're not actually going after anything. You're not a character with a want, right? You're not the protagonist of your own story, so why would you understand the concept of protagonists moving through a momentum circle? So it really does kind of relate to itself. But yeah, I think, again, that quote from Alex Hormozi was, at what point does something you've heard your whole life become real for you? I want you to be looking for the simple pieces of information that you need to integrate as beliefs that will then influence your life. The lessons that you're likely looking for are not things that you've never heard of before. They will very likely be a return to the simple, clear principles of a given field and making sure that you integrate those things into your belief system. I hope this video or podcast, has been helpful for you, and I will see you guys next week.